Hi everyone, this is a short screencast for Independent Colleges Dublin for CIMA E2 for November 2014. And what we're covering within this particular screencast is Porter's Five Forces, quite a popular topic for your E2 examiner and certainly one that I'd have a basic grip on before you go into the exam. So in terms of the requirement, we're just really asked to outline, describe, discuss indeed Porter's Five Forces. We have a company, FF, that's in the supermarket industry, is looking to assess its market position and indeed industry competition, the attractiveness of a particular industry. Okay, so if we have a look at the answer, what you'll see is, as always, opening paragraph, just a little bit of information about Porter's Five Forces and the sorts of words that you'll be using, some that you'll take from the question itself. It's the Porter's Five Forces is useful to assess obviously the attractiveness and particularly the profitability in a given industry. And in effect, what Porter says is that the potential for profit, the attractiveness of the industry, is really a direct result of the interaction of a series of forces, environmental and industry forces. What they go on to do then is just to list them. We don't necessarily have to do that in the answer, but if you can do it quickly, it gives your marker a fix on the fact that this person at least knows the key headings. Often, as I've said before, students tend to get confused between different models. So if you can show immediately that you know the forces, you can get that down quick. I think that's a good idea. So really, what are we talking about under these headings? Well, as we said above, we're talking about the interaction, or indeed perhaps the collective strength of the forces. And so what a company is looking to do is to say, well, under these headings, how strong are these factors? And if they're all extremely strong, should we either not go into this market, or if we're already in it, should we get out of it? Okay, so what you'll see that they do, they lay it out just paragraph by paragraph. We could add a little heading here, no need necessarily to do that given we have headings above. What they do in each paragraph is just give a fix on defining each element and then giving perhaps some examples that are relevant to FF. So this first one, as you'd expect, barriers to entry, pretty straightforward. We're looking at things that are going to stop entrants coming in, or items perhaps that need to be overcome by new entrants. So particularly in the supermarket industry, things like capital obviously are going to be important, and indeed supply channels. So really what we're looking to say is that, are there high or low barriers to entry in this particular situation? And if they are high, then that's a potential problem. Okay. In terms of bargaining power of suppliers, as you'll see, to a large extent, if the number of suppliers are few, or if it's low, they may well have more power. It may well be that they'll group or indeed collude together. And what would they do? Well, essentially, price is the key issue. So price is what, let's say, FF company would be concerned about in relation to the bargaining power of suppliers. So if there's few, that would perhaps indicate high power, then that's a potential problem. The other issue outside of the number of firms would be the switching costs. In other words, if the switching costs for companies are higher, that creates a problem in itself. Okay. Buyers or power buyers, fairly straightforward again. As you would expect, the fewer the buyers, the more power that they would have, and particularly when the offering is undifferentiated as well. Okay, so what would buyers want to do? Obviously, they would want to force prices down, which is not something that our particular company would be particularly interested in. So key point then is really the size and indeed number. If it's fewer, the force is likely to be stronger. Okay. Next point in relation to substitutes. Really, let's be careful on what substitutes mean. And as I've said above, when we're listing these factors out, let's define what we mean by power buyers, substitutes, etc. Now, in this particular case, a substitute is really just a product that satisfies the same needs. It's not necessarily exactly the same type of product or exactly the same product. It satisfies the same needs, and certainly in terms of supermarkets, there will be quite a few opportunities for customers to go elsewhere, perhaps the local store, perhaps the local butcher, etc., etc. So there are some substitutes available for the consumer. Okay, you'll note that one of the things that supermarkets try to do is differentiate, perhaps in the form of loyalty cards. Okay, in terms of rivalry or competition, obviously the degree or level of competition in a firm or indeed in an industry is going to have a particular impact upon the attractiveness or indeed the profitability. So really what they do is they define what competitors are. Perhaps you wouldn't think of doing that, but certainly do it, as I've said, do it in each of the headings. Direct competition between the organization and intermediate rivals, i.e. organizations offering similar products or indeed services. Okay, so the strength of that competitive rivalry is obviously key in terms of establishing whether or not to go into an industry for a given company or to stay in it. In this case, FF will have to consider that area. Okay, so really nice little conclusion here. Don't forget, if you can, to conclude in these type of, particularly the section A style questions, just a sentence or two. They just sum up to say, obviously, this analysis will help the FF company establish the opportunities and threats, and in effect the factors that drive profitability, and therefore inform the competitive strategy. Yeah. So in essence, then, with Porter's 5 forces, we have a series of 5 factors or 5 forces. The strength or otherwise of those factors is what drives industry attractiveness or indeed profitability within the industry. In this typical question, you're going to be given some information about the industry. It wasn't too big in this, but given the fact that they were using a supermarket, it would have been fairly easy to, relate your common sense or your basic knowledge in each of those paragraphs. So do try as far as possible to relate into the scenario. I think that's important. Get your headings and your terminology right. That's a no not to do that, and maybe a little bit annoying for your marker. We see the student getting confused between 2 sets of different models when it's just really a case of rote learning. But do remember that E2 is about a certain amount of application. So outside of our rote learning and our definitions in our first paragraph, let's apply your knowledge of each of the forces to the scenario that you're provided with. Okay, hopefully that's been helpful, and good luck in your studies.